history as well. Later on today at 5:35, we're going to have a guy named Matt Jennings. He does a podcast, Locked on Horned Frogs. He went off last night on so many things involving the TCU football program. He was also brought up in Gary Patterson's weekly press conference last week, gave him more publicity than perhaps that podcast even had. We got a good friend of ours, Stephen Simcox. We work with him. He's a part of the same podcast. Talked to him for a second or two about it, about what they said last week. And Patterson brought up, he's got rabbit ears, and they're a team that's right now, they're struggling, and we'll have him on it today at 5:35 on what he said and what he thinks.
What did I text you guys this weekend after that West Virginia loss? Outside of being comfortable with Gary Patterson, or he's the guy and he has all this, what is he really doing for TCU?
The crowd, the attendance is not boomed. Even when they were winning.
Oh, it's gotten worse.
Their defense, which is what his specialty is right now a wreck, right?
Yeah.
The offense is hit and miss.
Yep.
And I'll tell you what, Matt Jennings gets into a few things about the program as well that Gary's kind of been able to kind of dodge a little bit because of, well, let's be honest, we've had these things said about us. Perhaps who's covering him and who is he kind of untouchable? And maybe he got to a point where he thinks he's untouchable. Every week there's drama about some sort of deflection of them losing a game.
And I know he's the gold standard, but I'll just say it.
At TCU.
No. The guy I'm about to mention. And you can't compare every coach to Nick Saban, but Nick Saban never bitches about what somebody wrote about him or what somebody said about him. You know why? Because Nick Saban knows who he is. Nick Saban doesn't need to worry about it. Now, granted, things go a lot better for him, but you know why things go better for him? Because he doesn't care about that crap.
When you go to deflect something to take the pressure or the eyeballs off of maybe a problem, you actually just create another one. Nick Saban on occasion has talked about, you guys are the ones writing all that. And that's just a generalization of the media as far as Bill Parcells when he said eat the cheese as well.
Yeah, I mean,
don't eat the cheese.
Saban does address the media. He just doesn't he'll just kind of, mention it's rat poison or don't eat the cheese and stuff like that. But I don't watch his press conferences religiously by any means, but I can't recall him getting really upset personally by some article, after a bad Alabama performance. I mean, maybe he has. Bama fans, you can fill us in on that. But, I mean, Gary Patterson for the longest time has been one of the most sensitive football coaches in America. There's not even an argument for that, or against that, excuse me. He has absolutely been one of the most sensitive football coaches in America. This year with them not performing up to their typical standards and the fact that there's really not an excuse not to be. I mean, the defense, okay, it's not as good as it has been, and maybe the talent's not as good as it has been, so there's not a whole lot that you can do about that ultimately. But when you got Quentin Johnston and Zach Evans and, Max Duggan even to an extent, you should be more productive than you have been. And they just aren't as good defensively. They're sort of average offensively. And, it's just there's no juice there. There's no swagger. There's none of that typical, confidence that you get out of Fort Worth. It's just kind of bleh right now. And I think that I probably saw more TCU fans than I've ever seen before actually, considering what life after Patterson would be like. And it's weird because a week ago it was brought up and he, of course, heard that and he was like, threatened by them even talking about it. But then, you turn around and you go perform like that against a bad West Virginia team. Love you, Mountaineers fans, but let's face it, they're not a good team right now. So at home, I mean, that was an awful loss.
500 yards or whatever it was against a team that has struggled.
That was a terrible loss. So, I don't expect to hear him getting fired like Matt Wells soon by any means, but I can't rule it out entirely. Just the thought of there does seem to be some smoke about,
his contract runs through 2023.
Things getting a little stale, yeah.
All right, when we come back, Carlos Silva, he'll join us. He writes for the Lubbock Avalanche Journal on Matt Wells. We'll also have Bob